Elizabeth, what's fascinating about it is I think I know exactly who the three characters are within 5 minutes of them arriving on screen. And then it's like, where are these people going? And it's slowly revealed, for instance, you're big into the Grateful Dead, and then you're ringing home to your daughter, and I'm wondering what's going on with her husband. There's something I'm not quite getting. And I mean that as a compliment. Like it must be kind of a gift as an actor to get a part like this and see the journey it takes.
I think the greatest gift with the journey was being able to shoot in order. And there's so
Okay.
much you can do before starting a job and trying to figure out these, if you know the schedule a little bit ahead of time, these pillars that you hold on to, knowing that, okay, we're at, day two, we are going to jump all the way to two-thirds into the film. And so I have to kind of figure out what the structure means and where I would be then. And luckily, there was none of that jumping around for the most part. We really got to shoot in order. So there was as much prep work as you can about your relationships with the people that you're speaking to off camera. You have to obviously make decisions and choices about that, or I guess not so obviously. You can also just, fake it till you make it, which is also, totally valid as long as it's believable to the audience. It doesn't really matter which way you do it. But there is a gift in being able to shoot it in order that we all surprised, I think, ourselves in where we ended up because we were allowed to live through the experiences of the character and learn from it and not be committed to something we chose out of kind of nothing.
Yeah. And Carrie, I gather, and Elizabeth's alluded to it there, that this was probably like working on no other movie you'd worked on before in terms of the way he shot, being in this apartment. Like it must be you, and you've done lots of things and you've done big machine things and small machine
Yeah.
things, but this seemed kind of unique.
Definitely. I mean, that was part of the allure of it. Not only was it written for us and then we actually were able to do it together, but Ozza knew exactly what his budget was. He knew what the shots were. The way that the film
Mm,
is filmed is actually written into the screenplay, so there's nothing arbitrary. And when you're working on TV
right.
or some of these big machines that have gobs of money, they can afford to make mistakes, then you don't have to be so prepared and so specific. And it was we also telling the story in order is such a lost art. The only place we do that is the theater. So for me, it did feel
Mm,
like a similar to preparing for theater, which is something I return to regularly when I can. But it was very pleasurable. And the thing you identified in your first question is also true. It's structured so that you meet us as stereotypes and as how we see each other. And then
mm,
as our point of view of each other gets complicated in the film, so does the audience's point of view of us get complicated. And that structure is very baked in and it's very deft and
yeah.
very specific. And I love that
Yeah.
craftsmanship.
Yeah. And either of you can answer this. I gather, though, he gave you like movies to watch to get you to like inhabit a kind of 90s indie New York cinema, Paul Auster kind of vibe. So he gave you a homework, the cheek
There
of
was
him.
no real assignment, but you and Ozza did
No,
that.
Oz and I just kind of hung out as friends and we watched some clips from films that I hadn't seen and then he talked. And it wasn't necessarily direct references of a style or a tone. It was more about what lives in his deepest lizard brain in a way, consciously or unconsciously while he's writing. And so
Right.
I think every time I work with a filmmaker, I try as much as I can, even if it's not directly related to the film itself, to understand their point of view so that I can access a part of their imagination as
Hmm.
best as I can.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so I did watch some films because of that. And there are Hal Hartley films, there are Romare films. There was a, a Interiors, which is a Woody
Hmm.
Allen film that's kind
Yeah.
of lost in his love song to Bergman, and so there are pieces like that I watch just to kind of understand more about where Oz is coming from as a filmmaker.
Yeah. Yeah. And just talking of doing something outside the box, I'm just kind of out of time, but I loved you in WandaVision for a similar reason, in that this was superhero stuff, but it was told in such a unique, trippy, weird kind of way. Do you look back on that show with a tremendous amount of fondness? Because it was
Oh
kind of a
yeah.
game changer for
Oh gosh.
superhero serials.
Yeah, I think we were all shocked by the response of it because it was we really felt like we were doing one of the strangest things Marvel had tried to do, and we felt like,
Yeah.
well, we're either gonna we're probably going to fail, but that's okay because this is really crazy and fun that we're taking a big stab at or a big swing at something that they hadn't shown before. But I think also with that show, speaking to this idea of the very specific form that Ozza was sticking to at telling the story, WandaVision in its own way had a very specific structure and form, and it was these Marvel larger than life characters, but this story had to be told through television. And I think it was strange to imagine these characters not on TV, but the structure of the storytelling could only have been told in television.
Yeah.
And so they made it make sense for the medium. And I think that was incredibly important and specific to that project.
Yeah. Well, look, you're getting to work with great people, it seems. So continued success to both of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Elizabeth Olsen there talking about WandaVision and also His Three Daughters, which is now on Netflix from the 20th of September. And you also heard Carrie Coon there talking to me about the great new movie on Netflix that was directed by Azazel Jacobs, who gave us a movie a couple of years ago called The Lovers, which was very successful, all about a couple who've been having extramarital affairs, but managed to fall back in love, starring Deborah Winger and Tracy Letts and our own Aidan Gillen, which is now being remade because it was so successful. So I spoke to Azazel Jacobs about His Three Daughters and the unusual process of making it. I was surprised when I was reading up about it. I kind of naturally assumed you front and centre were thinking of your own parents or you were caring for someone, but I gather that wasn't necessarily the motivation. Like, this wasn't a personal story you were mining from your own life. So what was the motivation for you?
I would say it was me mining from my own life in terms of just something that seemed very, like, my parents are elderly, and there's there's something that seemed very far away in terms of their passing suddenly became very close, and I was becoming a caretaker for them, and I was learning how to do that, and just trying to understand, how do you take care of your parents in this way? How do you change this relationship? How do I figure out their doctors, and how do I figure out how to medication? All these things suddenly felt very out of control, and confusing to me. And then it lent itself to me telling a story which I felt like I had a window of time before I was going to fully become a caretaker. So yes, I've definitely, some of it comes from experiences that I've had in the past of loved ones passing. But a lot of this came from me in preparation for what was suddenly very tangible in front of me. And trying to deal with some of those fears before it happened, which may be silly, and also trying to deal with some of the hopes that I have as well in terms of making it through, because it's hard for me to imagine the person they'll be when they're both gone.
And I guess it's a universal fear of anyone who's alive in lots of ways. I was talking to Elizabeth and Carrie just a few minutes ago, and the thing that or certainly Elizabeth was most pleased about, it seemed to me when she was talking to me, was shooting in order. It seemed like such a gift for them. And I gather that's a very hard thing to do. And the bigger a movie, the impossibility that slowly becomes. From the get-go, did you want it to be shot in sequence?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I love about the smaller things. That's what I love about punk rock. I felt like that's what it said, which was like, hey, actually what you have right in front of you can be an advantage that other bigger productions or bigger whatever, more money would entail. Like that, they lose that ability. So this was something that was one of the attributes I could sell to not only to myself, but to the actors, of saying, hey, yeah, we may not do it this way, but we're going to do it this way, which will afford something that they can never do. And shooting in order is one of those luxuries. It means that you're always talking about a scene that you've already done before, that you know where you're coming from, that you're building on top of it. And it's not like a make-believe, well, when we shoot that in 2 weeks, hopefully you're going to be coming from this emotional place. But we could actually say, well, yesterday this is what happened, and this is where you were when we called rap, and this is where we're picking up from. So it was something very concrete.
Yeah. And can I ask you just like a boring, mundane question, but just on that, like it takes place over 3 emotionally filled days. How long did it take to shoot? I presume longer than 3 days.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely being painstaking in terms of we're shooting on film, and so it you still are moving at a certain speed, even though it was very fast. I think we shot truly over about 17 days. So what that meant was extensive, especially with the cinematographer Sam Levy and I, like talking quite a lot about how we are going to cover this, knowing exactly what we were looking for, and that by the time we were rolling on each scene, that we had prepared ourselves, whether just going through blocking or rehearsal, whatever it was, so that we were going to be able to pull off this type of schedule. But it also meant that we were shooting, for the most part, every scene completely. So we were never leaving half of a scene done and coming back to the next day, because we really did have to stay on a clip. I have to say it was tight, but again, it was like one of these advantages that I felt like, I guess, I know every film has less days than they used to many years ago, but in this case, I wouldn't have wanted more time. I don't know what I would have done with that. There was a certain pressure that was really helpful for this film.
I sat down to watch this last night. I really enjoyed it. And my wife watched it with me as well. And I was telling her what it was about beforehand. And she was going, are we going to do this on a Sunday night? I have to go to work tomorrow.
Yeah.
And and just bear with me for a second. So I suppose, how do you get people in who might think, do I want to watch a movie about three daughters attending to the possible death of their father? Maybe, but that's not your question to answer. But I'm just saying that was my wife's reaction. Now, she loved it once she watched it. But do you ever think about, this is a bleak piece of storytelling I'm engaging here. How do I find an audience for it who may not be up for that?
You know what it is that I really needed this story going through this. I don't have that many examples. There's a few films I could see of families dealing with it in this way that I felt like, I could relate to. So I believe, like this is the best case scenario, right? That you outlive your parents. But I still felt completely confused and without a roadmap and some sense of anything. So my hope is that people are going to need this film as much as I did, and just in terms of just going like, okay, I can relate to this. I can experience it. And the other thing is that like I cast these actors not only for their great ability, but also that they all have really good comedy chops. And like I wanted that. Like the truth is that making this film was very joyful, and I hope that gets ultimately communicated to an audience that this is not a heavy. I'm no interest in making something that's just going to weigh you down. I want this to be fun and funny and joyful besides all the other things.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is absolutely. And I was playing devil's advocate there. You realize. Tell me this, your previous maybe it's 2 movies ago, but The Lovers, very successful, had a fellow countryman of mine, Aidan Gillen, in it, which is always nice to see. I gathered that's been made into a kind of different version in India.
Can you believe that?
That must be deeply satisfying.
Amazing. You sit down in a little coffee shop, you write a script, and the film comes out. I'm proud of it. It exists. I'm happy that it's found a life, that people have responded in the way that they have. And then I get this email that there's like, they want to retell this story, and very culturally specific. Like they're not just trying to just translate it, but they actually like bring it over into their world. And I got to see it. A lot of the framing is the same framing as the film that I made. Except it's very somebody else's personal story. It is the dream situation. I wonder if like bands feel that way when they hear covers, or they like. For me, this was just like it's yours, run with it. That's all. Like I just wanted them to find their own way with it, and watching the film has been a total joy. But completely surprising. One of those amazing experiences that like, I hope that I heard there's other countries now that are interested in telling the story. It's a really simple story. I think that's a thing,
I know.
Like The Lovers is what happens if, if a couple who have been cheating on each other fall in love with each other. It's like very, very basic. So I think there's something about the simplicity of that story that could translate to other countries and other cultures the way it has so far.
Yeah, we'll await it. But in the meantime, his three daughters is great. So I hope that goes far and wide for you. Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the time.